Is Ethiopia's demand to access the sea legitimate? Is a question that is currently terrifying the entire Horn of Africa. You have a prime minister in Addis Ababa quoting the 19th century warriors and talking about natural rights. And you have neighbors in Eritrea and Somalia checking ammunition stockpiles. But if we strip away the modern politics and look purely at the history, does Ethiopia have a point? Does a nation of 130 million people have historical right to a coastline that is currently sovereign territory of another country? To answer that, you have to understand that for the vast majority of human history, Ethiopia and Eritrea were not different things. In fact, if you went back in time 1500 years and tried to explain the border that exists today to an Axumite king, he would have looked at you like you're insane. You see, the story of Ethiopian state is the story of a mountain fortress that is constantly trying to keep its front door open. And that front door is the Red Sea. Let's go back to the beginning, the classical era. The kingdom of Axum. This is one of the four great powers of the ancient world, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. And Axum was not a landlocked mountain kingdom. It was a maritime superpower. Its capital was in the highlands in modern day Tigray, but its lungs, its wallet, and its gateway to the world was the port of Adulis, located in modern day Massawa in Eritrea. Archaeologically speaking, there was no distinction. We have found Axumite coins, gold coins, minted for international trade scattered all over the Eritrean coast. King Zoskales, who ruled in the 1st century AD, didn't govern the mountains and trade with the coast. He ruled both. The coast was a commercial district, the highlands were the administrative district. They were one organic unit. So, is the claim legitimate? In the ancient sense, absolutely. The genesis of Ethiopian civilization is inextricably linked to the Eritrean coast. This was the catastrophe that ended an era. Was Adulis destroyed, the Axumite emperor was no more. It collapsed inwards, but from its ashes it gave birth to a succession of new empires, the Zagwe dynasty and later the Solomonic dynasty. Now, these successor empires were different. They were no longer a maritime superpower with a navy that could challenge Rome or Persia. They were land based powers. But, and this is a crucial part, they still frantically needed the sea. Even though the capital moved south to places like Lalibela and later Gondar, the economic lifeline remained the Eritrean coast. For the next several hundred years, the port of Massawa rose up to replace Adulis as a primary gateway. The Ethiopian emperors in Gondar relied entirely on Massawa to export their gold, ivory, and civet musk, and to import goods of the world. And the political structure reflected this. The Eritrean highlands, known then as Medri Bahri, were not independent. They were vassal state of the emperor. The rulers of the Eritrean plateau paid annual tributes to the emperor in Gondar. We have records of them sending cattle, gold, and agricultural produce south to the imperial capital. It was a clear hierarchy. The coast served the core. To manage this, the emperors created a specific title for the ruler of the northern province, the Bahr Nagash. It translates literally to the king of the sea. His capital was Debarwa in modern Eritrea. His job was to govern the maritime province for the emperor. Now, did he actually control the waves like the old Axumites? No. But the existence of the title proves the intent. The emperors viewed the coast not as a foreign land, but as a province that was simply the maritime wing of the empire. Then came the disaster. The year 1557. The Ottoman Empire, the superpower of the day, decided they wanted the Red Sea for themselves. They seized the port of Massawa, and this is the moment the present geography was built for Ethiopia. For the next 300 years, Ethiopia was effectively under house arrest. The Ottomans sat on Massawa, and if the emperor in Gondar wanted to import muskets or silk or even send a letter to the Pope in Rome, he had to go through the Ottoman customs house. The Ethiopians were the producers, but the port was held by a hostile foreign power that could turn off the tap whenever they wanted. This trauma, the trauma of being choked, is what drives Ethiopian foreign policy to this day. After 1557, the Ottomans established what they called the Habesh Iyalat, the province of Abyssinia. Their ambition was to conquer the whole thing. They marched inland, captured the Bahar Nagash capital at Adwa, and tried to push into the Tigrayan highlands. But they hit a wall, the Ethiopian army and the Ethiopian geography. The terrain was too steep and the climate was too harsh. So the Ottomans retreated to the coast and realized that they couldn't rule this land directly. It was just too expensive. Instead, they empowered a local dynasty of Beja aristocrats known as the Naibs of Arkiko. This is a detail that often gets missed, but it is crucial. For 3 centuries, the Ottoman rule was actually a proxy rule. The Naibs were the gatekeepers. They played a double game. They swore loyalty to the Sultan in Istanbul, but they negotiated daily with the Ethiopian warlords in the mountains. The power dynamic was a stalemate. The Ethiopian emperors couldn't take the port of Massawa because they had no navy. The Naibs couldn't take the mountains because they had no army. So they settled into an uncomfortable rhythm of commerce and extortion. The Ethiopian produced the goods, the Naibs taxed them. The Ottomans took a cut. But in the 19th century, the board flipped. The Ottoman Empire became the sick man of Europe. They were weak. So in 1865, they transferred the Red Sea coast to their ambitious vassal, the Khedivate of Egypt. This changed everything. The Egyptians weren't like the distant Ottomans. They were modernized, aggressive, and expansionists. They fortified Massawa and marched inland, seizing the city of Karan and the Bogos region. They strangled Ethiopia's trade routes completely. This led to 2 massive wars, the Battle of Gundet and Gura in the 1870s, which Emperor Yohannes IV annihilated the Egyptian armies. I made a video about it. Check it out. So by the 1880s, Egypt was broke and collapsing under the Mahdist revolt in Sudan. They needed to get out. Enter the British. The British Empire didn't want the coast for themselves. They already had Aden in Yemen, but they were terrified that their rivals, the French, would take it. So the British pulled a classic diplomatic maneuver. They signed the Hewitt Treaty in 1884. They agreed to help evacuate the Egyptian garrisons, and in the resulting power vacuum, they encouraged a friendly European power to step in. That power was Italy. The Italians had already bought the port of Assab in 1882 from a local company, and in 1885, with a nod from the British, Italian troops landed at Massawa to replace the Egyptians. The Ethiopians initially thought the British were bringing in the Italians as allies against the Muslims. They were wrong. They had simply traded a crumbling Egyptian neighbor for a hungry European colonizer. This is where the modern tragedy begins. You have Emperor Menelik II, a brilliant strategist but a man playing a terrible hand of cards. He is surrounded. The British are in the north, the French are in Djibouti, and the Italians have bought a dusty strip of sand called Assab in the south. Menelik knew he could not fight everyone, so in 1889, he signed the infamous Treaty of Wuchale with Italy. This is the original sin of the Ethiopian-Eritrea border. Menelik effectively traded the coast for the throne. He allowed Italy to consolidate their colony of Eritrea in exchange for Italy recognizing his sovereignty over the rest of Ethiopia. It was a Faustian bargain. Menelik secured the highlands but legally signed away the coast. However, and this is a big however, Menelik didn't think it was permanent. In 1891, he sent a circular letter to the heads of states of Europe. It is a fascinating document. He wrote, "If God gives me strength, I shall restore the ancient frontiers of Ethiopia." And he explicitly listed the Red Sea coast as the natural border. He was telling the Europeans, I am letting you hold this for now, but don't get comfortable. Of course, the Italians got very comfortable. They used Eritrea as a staging ground, a massive military base to invade Ethiopia, first in 1896, where they lost at Adwa, and then in 1935 under Mussolini, where they won. For a brief period, they united the two countries. They created the Italian East Africa. They built highways connecting Asmara to Addis Ababa, not for the benefit of Africans, but to suck the resources out of the interior and ship them out through Massawa. But World War II ended that. The British kicked the Italians out, and suddenly the world had a problem. What do we do with Eritrea? Emperor Haile Selassie went to the United Nations and made his case. He argued that Eritrea was not a colony to be liberated, but a lost province to be returned. And the West agreed with him, not because they cared about ancient Axumite history, but because of Cold War strategy. The Americans wanted a radio base in Asmara, and they knew Ethiopia needed a port to be a viable ally. So in 1952, Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia. And this is where we see the strategic imperative in action. Haile Selassie knew that a federation was fragile, so he tried to cement the union with concrete and steel. He looked at the port of Assab. Now, Assab is in the middle of a volcanic desert. It has no water, no agriculture, and very few people. It makes no sense as a standalone city, but Haile Selassie turned it into an industrial heart of the nation. In 1967, Ethiopia built a massive oil refinery in Assab with Soviet assistance. They built a dedicated highway trucking route straight to Addis Ababa. Ethiopia poured billions of dollars into Assab, treating it not as a distant outpost, but as a nostril of the nation. They were building their critical infrastructure on land that was culturally drifting away from them. Because, as we know, the marriage failed. Haile Selassie dissolved the federation in 1962, sparking a brutal 30-year war for independence. And this brings us to the supreme irony of 1991. The Eritrean rebels won. They marched into Asmara. Ethiopia was defeated, and in 1993, Eritrea legally, formally, and internationally became an independent state. Ethiopia became the largest landlocked country on earth overnight. But the history didn't just vanish. For a few years, it looked like they had solved it. The new leaders in Ethiopia and Eritrea were former comrades. Ethiopia continued to use the ports of Assab and Massawa tax-free. It seemed they had recreated the Axumite model. 2 administrations, 1 economic zone. Then came 1998, the border war, a senseless trench warfare conflict over a dusty town called Badme. And the door slammed shut. Ethiopia lost access to Assab. The refinery stopped working, and the highway went silent. And that is the situation today. You have Ethiopia, a demographic and economic giant, forced to route 95% of its trade through a tiny railway line to Djibouti, paying billions in port fees. Meanwhile, the port of Assab, built by Ethiopians for Ethiopians, sits largely empty, just a few hundred miles away. So let's look at the balance sheet. Does Ethiopia have a legitimate claim? If you look at international law, the answer is a hard no. The borders were settled in 1993 and reaffirmed in 2000. Sovereignty is sovereignty. You don't get to annex your neighbor just because you used to own their house in the 4th century. But if you look at the grand strategy and history, the answer is more complex. Ethiopia is a prisoner of geography that was carved up by the Italian colonizers and the Ottoman pashas. Their claim is based on the reality that is, for 2,000 years, the mountains and the sea were a single economic engine. The tragedy of the Horn of Africa is that these two nations are like Siamese twins who were separated by a messy surgery. Ethiopia has the heart and the stomach, Eritrea has the lungs. Both are trying to survive alone, but history and geography keeps whispering that they were designed to breathe together. And that's my message today. Like, doesn't really matter what you say. If you want to coexist and be rich, you need to start from history and understand reality instead of just being tribal. That's my message, and I'll see you on the next video.